The year is 193. A group of heavily armed soldiers stands on the walls of the imperial palace in Rome, yelling to the crowd below. They are literally auctioning off the entire Roman Empire to the highest bidder. A ridiculously wealthy senator named Didius Julianus stands in the street, shouting back bid increases. He eventually wins the empire by promising each guard 25,000 silver coins. Julianus is thrilled, but he has a massive problem. The money he just promised is virtually worthless, and his new reign will last only 66 days before he is brutally executed. But to understand how the greatest superpower on Earth turned into a cheap yard sale, we must go back to the beginning. For centuries, the Roman Empire functioned like a giant, militarized pyramid scheme. It was an economy built entirely on constant conquest. Whenever the legions marched into a new territory, they brought back mountains of gold, silver, and millions of enslaved workers. This massive influx of looted wealth funded the spectacular gladiator games, the massive aqueducts, and the lavish lifestyles of the ruling elite. But then, a sensible emperor named Hadrian looked at the map and realized Rome had reached its physical limits. He stopped the expansion and built giant walls instead. The incoming flow of free gold vanished overnight, but the massive imperial bills did not. The Roman government still had to pay for its massive army, its complex bureaucracy, and its welfare programs. Enter Emperor Nero, a man who loved performing bad poetry and spending money he did not have. After a devastating fire destroyed much of Rome, Nero needed cash to build his giant golden palace. He looked at the treasury and had a brilliant, terrible idea. He ordered his mints to recall all the pure silver denarius coins. He melted them down, mixed in cheap copper, and reissued them. The coins looked almost identical, but they were a lie. Nero had just invented currency debasement, and he unlocked a door that could never be closed. Once the emperors realized they could literally create money out of thin air, they could not stop. Every time an emperor needed to pay the army or build a vanity monument, they just diluted the silver content of the coins even further. Over the next 200 years, the silver content of the Roman denarius plummeted from 95% to less than 5%. By the end, the coins were basically cheap copper discs coated in a microscopic layer of silver wash. If you rubbed the coin too hard with your thumb, the silver would literally scratch off, exposing the financial fraud beneath. The Roman public was not stupid. Merchants quickly realized that these new coins had almost zero actual value. If you walked into a bakery with a pocket full of fake silver, the baker did not just happily accept it at face value. He demanded 10 times, then 100 times, then 1,000 times more coins for the exact same loaf of bread. Rome had stumbled directly into the terrifying monster of hyperinflation. Suddenly, a simple basket of wheat that used to cost a single coin required a giant wheelbarrow full of metal. The economy was spinning completely out of control, and nobody knew how to stop the ride. You might wonder why the Roman leadership did not just stop spending money. The answer is simple. The emperors were absolutely terrified of their own soldiers. The military was the only thing keeping them on the throne, and the soldiers did not care about economic theory. They wanted their bonuses, and they wanted them now. If an emperor refused to raise military pay, the legionaries would simply assassinate him and find a new boss who would. This created a toxic cycle. Emperors debased the currency to pay the army, which caused inflation, which made the soldiers demand more pay, which forced more debasement. This deadly cycle of greed and inflation pushed Rome into a dark era known as the crisis of the 3rd century. For 50 years, the empire was a chaotic free-for-all. There were over 26 different emperors, and almost all of them died by assassination, poison, or battlefield betrayals. The political system was so broken that the empire actually fractured into 3 rival states, each fighting for survival. The economy was completely shattered, and the once mighty Roman coin was now regarded as worthless garbage across the Mediterranean. It was a total systematic collapse, and the entire world watched in horror as the great empire began to tear itself apart. Just when everything seemed completely lost, a strict reformer named Diocletian seized power and decided to fix the economy by sheer brute force. If you are enjoying this chaotic journey through history, Take a quick second to hit that like and subscribe button so you do not miss our next wild adventure. Diocletian realized that hyperinflation was destroying the empire, so he issued the edict on maximum prices. This law set a strict price ceiling on over 1,000 goods and services. If a merchant charged even 1 cent more than the government limit for beef, grain, or boots, the punishment was immediate execution. Diocletian thought his terrifying law would cure inflation, but he forgot basic human nature. Merchants refused to sell their goods at a loss under the threat of death. Instead of lowering prices, they simply hid their products and stopped selling them altogether. Markets emptied overnight, and the entire Roman economy shifted to the black market. People traded goods in dark alleys, far from the eyes of the imperial guards. The formal economy completely ground to a halt, proving once and for all that you cannot solve a deep financial crisis by simply making it illegal for things to be expensive. This situation became so absurd that the Roman government actually stopped trusting its own money. The imperial tax collectors realized that collecting millions of worthless copper coins was completely pointless. So the state announced that taxes would no longer be collected in cash. Instead, they demanded taxes in kind. This meant citizens had to pay their taxes in actual sacks of grain, jars of olive oil, or physical labor. When the government itself refuses to accept the very currency it prints, the illusion is completely broken. Money had lost its magic, and the empire was sliding back into the barter system. This economic collapse triggered a massive wave of migration. To escape the brutal tax collectors, wealthy Roman citizens abandoned their city townhouses and fled to the countryside. They built massive, self-sufficient estates called villas. The desperate middle class, unable to pay their debts, followed them. Regular people voluntarily gave up their freedom to work on these estates in exchange for food and protection from the chaos. This massive shift of the population destroyed the vibrant urban life of Rome, and it quietly laid the structural foundations for the feudal system that would dominate Europe for the next 1,000 years. By the time the famous barbarian tribes finally crossed the borders, they were not conquering a mighty, golden superpower. They were essentially walking into a bankrupt, hollowed-out shell of an empire where the lights had already been turned off. In fact, many Roman citizens actually welcomed the barbarian invaders because their taxes were lower and their leaders were far less oppressive than the corrupt Roman state. The great empire did not fall to some unstoppable foreign military genius. It slowly rotted from within, destroyed by a long line of rulers who chose cheap financial tricks, endless debt, and runaway inflation over real economic stability. This ancient disaster teaches us a surprisingly relevant lesson about human nature and modern society. Trust is the ultimate currency of any civilization. Money is not just metal or paper. It is a shared promise between citizens and their leaders. When governments try to solve systemic problems by simply printing more cash, debasing their currency, or hiding the symptoms of economic decay, they eventually destroy that trust. Once the belief in the system vanishes, the entire structure collapses, no matter how many walls or armies you build to protect it. It is a lesson we are still trying to master today. So the next time you look at a coin, remember that Rome was not conquered by swords, but by bad math and desperate emperors. It turns out that economic laws are much harder to defeat than any barbarian army. If you want to keep discovering the wildest and funniest secrets of history, make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a comment about which historical disaster we should cover next, and share this with a friend who thinks they could have managed the Roman treasury better than Nero. We will see you in the next ridiculous chapter of human history.